Hi again then guys, and welcome to this week's installment of Rivals. And as you'll have seen from the title, of course, this week's Rivals is a lot bigger than it would usually be. We're not just putting two cars head to head this time, we're going for an epic six-way battle. And what better battle between six cars than between the six top homologation specials from rallying, especially the Group B, in Gran Turismo 6. Now these six cars are the Audi Quattro, the Lancia Delta, the Renault 5 Turbo, the Peugeot 205 T16, the Nissan 240 RS, and the Ford RS 200. So we'll do an individual rough breakdown on each car, and then of course pit them head to head to see which wins. Now first up we have the Audi Quattro. This is a car that puts Audi's Quattro system on the map. It's a car which isn't necessarily used by as many players as some of the other cars in the series. Unfortunately, it's not a premium car and it's reasonably expensive. That's not unusual though for a homologation special. This particular model is 90 grand. You get a 2.1 litre, of course, turbo engine, all-wheel drive, and overall I would say that this car has a pretty decent mix of reasonably good straight-line performance and surprisingly beginner-friendly handling. Some Group B style cars can be known for being challenging. This one isn't. The Quattro is a very forgiving car, the handling is very good, and it handles itself very well for a car which isn't particularly heavy, but for a Group B style vehicle is quite large. Next up we have the Lancia Delta, one of my personal favourite hatchbacks, and interestingly the only premium car of the six. This car is a legend, and for good reason. It combines the advantages of a couple of the other models into a very good all-round package. You have the all-wheel drive that you'd expect from something like a Quattro or an RS 200, but in a vehicle that's more the size of something like a Volkswagen Golf GTI. So you get all that grip and power associated with a larger vehicle, but in a very compact, nimble package. The handling can be, ironically, a little bit heavy on the Delta, but with tuning, you can make this a very, very good all-round track car. It can launch off the line extremely well, and for the price of 55 grand, it is the best of all six in terms of affordability, which, considering it is a premium, is not bad at all. Next up we have the Renault 5 Turbo. This is by far the most challenging of the six cars to drive fast. It's one of only two of these vehicles which is rear-wheel drive rather than all-wheel drive, and the fact that it is an old-school mid-engine rear-wheel drive hot hatch means that it's a little bit trickier than you would typically expect a rally car to be to learn to drive fast, and that's something which also moved on through the generations to the Clio V6, vehicles which you have to put more effort into to get the best out of. And although the Renault 5 Turbo is definitely not the most powerful of the six, it is extremely light at just under 850 kilos. Although the price on the car is just under 75 grand, as a collector's piece, and especially as a track car, the Renault 5 can definitely punch well above its weight. Next up we have Peugeot's 205 T16, one of the rarest homologation cars ever made and one of the most valuable. The 205 is an extremely strong all-round package. 78 grand gets you a huge amount of power, a very significant amount of torque, and although the all-wheel drive and a variety of other factors mean that it does weigh more than, say, the Renault 5, it's still a very strong all-round performance car. The launch off the line and overall acceleration is very good, and although the handling is a little bit trickier for some people, it is a highly competitive all-round vehicle that can most definitely worry cars with a lot more power, and for a significantly higher price. The 205 is one of the most legendary Group B style homologation cars ever, and for good reason. It's an outstanding car. Next we have probably the most underestimated and most often forgotten car of this entire six. Alongside the Renault 5, this is a rear-wheel drive car, and it's the Nissan Silvia 240 RS. Visually, it's got a little bit of Audi Quattro in there with the overall shape, the craziest wheel arch extensions of all 6 vehicles, and is one of the rarest and, as I said, most underappreciated. This is a seriously good car. It has the largest engine in the whole group, and the fact that it is rear-wheel drive means it's a lot lighter than it looks. And finally, we have the most expensive car of the bunch, and probably not the most legendary, but more notably the most infamous. The car which almost single-handedly caused the end of Group B rallying due to a huge amount of deaths in a crash, the Ford RS200. 160 grand, Cosworth power, and insane acceleration. Off the line, it can keep up with the 205 T16, and although it's a little bit heavier than the Nissan or the Renault, it's still a very, very strong all-round car. The handling bears some similarities to the 205 T16 in that, although yes, you do have the all-wheel drive advantage, it's not necessarily a completely beginner-friendly car. Definitely not as much as something like an Audi Quattro. But that's it for the overview of our 6 vehicles in terms of how they feel. Now let's get down to the top trump style comparison to find out our winner. Now, before I get into the specific comparison of the specs, I do just want to highlight 2 things in particular to do with the video description down below, as I've mentioned before in other Rivals episodes. The one thing is that if you are interested in all of the car's individual lap times around the RedBull circuit, they are all listed in the description below. And it's closer than you might think, and some of the cars may be faster than you might have expected. The second thing is that if you would like to hear more in-depth reviews of some of these cars, I will put links in the description to my longer form reviews where I go more in depth about each of these vehicles. The ones, of course, that I've reviewed, that is. A couple of them I haven't reviewed yet. But now let's get into the real Rivals matchup. As you can see from the specs, this battle is a very close one. Even though some cars do have superior specs to others, as you'd expect, they do all fall within surprisingly similar parameters for the most part. Many of them have similar prices, very similar amounts of power, a similar PP, as you'd probably expect, and although the weight of the cars does vary a little bit, they do tend to stay in kind of organised groups within the category. You have some which are much more geared towards sheer power, but maybe compensate with extra weight as a payoff. Others may be less powerful, like the Renault, but extremely lightweight. And you have some which are a lot stronger than you might think, such as the Nissan, which has the power of the larger cars, but also, due to, amongst other things, the rear-wheel drive package, surprisingly low weight. In fact, it's as light as the Renault 5 with the full weight loss package, and given how much bigger a car it is, that really is surprising. But now let's find out which one of these, on paper, of course, not necessarily in all scenarios. This is, as always, just a bit of fun, and all of these cars are most definitely worth your time and consideration. Let's find out which one actually does win. Well, our first point, interestingly, goes to the only premium car in the category, the Lancia Delta, with a price of 55 grand. The next point goes to the Nissan 240 RS for having the largest pure engine capacity. Having the largest engine, of course, isn't always the best thing, because rotary engines are a perfect example of that. They produce more power than vehicles with larger engines for the most part. So, as I said, this is purely for fun, and we're using a top trump style, bigger is better mentality. But it's just a bit of fun, and that doesn't really matter. So that point goes to the Nissan. Perhaps surprisingly that the Nissan would have the largest engine. As far as PP, the point goes to the Peugeot 205 with the Ford RS200 coming in right behind it. Only 3 PP between them. As far as power, it's the Peugeot again at 487. Interestingly, again, only 3 higher than the Ford RS200 at 484 horsepower. As far as torque, this one's a surprising one, because although it's not the most powerful, the Lancia Delta actually has the highest torque output of the entire group at 420 foot-pounds, which is significantly higher than some of the others. As far as weight, it's ironically, very ironically when you consider the way they look, a two-way tie, as we mentioned earlier, between the Renault 5 and the Nissan 240 RS. Two cars which couldn't really look much more different in terms of size and bulkiness. But they both weigh a very impressive 848 kilos, and as such, both get a point there. As far as horsepower per tonne though, the Nissan really does run away with it. 521 horsepower per tonne is so far ahead of any of the other cars in this category, all of which sit at around the low to mid 400 region. That's a huge advantage for the Nissan, and when you look at its power and weight, well, that's not surprising. It has a very strong helping of both. And although the lap times are not given points in any of these rivals matches, because of course it depends on the driver, the car, the tuning and the track, it is worth noting, as you'll have seen from the description below, that the fastest car of the bunch was interestingly a car that got 0 points. The Ford RS200 with a 49.552 lap. Interestingly, coming in right behind it is our overall points winner, the Nissan 240 RS with a 49.732, and the slowest car of the group was, funnily enough, the Lancia Delta with a 52.294. Overall, the lap times, along with most of the other specs, were very close between all 6 cars, just as you'd want it to be. It's a very, very impressive 6-way battle. So overall, our winner with 3 points is the Nissan 240 RS. Coming in with 2 points each in equal second place are the Peugeot 205 T16 and Lancia Delta. Then it's the Renault R5 Turbo with 1 point. And finally, with 0 points apiece, it's ironically 2 of the most legendary cars in the category, the Audi Quattro and the Ford RS200. But as I said, this is purely for fun, and although those cars came last and others came first, etc., all 6 of these cars are legends for a reason. I would strongly recommend buying at least some of these, if not all of them, to give them a try. They are all outstanding track cars and rally cars in their own way, and each of them offers a very unique overall package. It's amazing what kind of versatility and differentiation you can have between a category that you'd assume would have cars that are so similar. And although they do share similarities, each one of them has a very distinct personality. And there's pretty much something to appeal to everyone. So that's it overall for this week's Versus matchup. As always, if you do have an original Rivals Versus match that you would like to see, be sure to slap that down in the comments below. If you've already commented it before, you don't need to repeat it again, but if you have a new idea, feel free to put that down there. And for now, as always, thanks for watching.